Hello everyone and welcome to the tavern. As you can tell, I'm not angry this time. In fact, I kind of enjoyed this episode quite a bit. For a couple reasons. One, they used a short story format, so we got 2 short stories rather than 1 longer episode. And frankly, for the stories we got, I think it works really well. Beyond that, Mojo! Yes, I love Mojo. He's not my favorite villain or anything like that, but he is so much fun. He is this weirdo from another dimension who just loves TV and movies and just entertainment, and his stories tend to be an excuse for fourth wall breaking jokes. The fact that we actually got a Mojo episode in this season, even if it's a short one, is really cool because honestly, I didn't expect that to happen. So enough preamble, let's get started. Also, I will try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, unlike last episode. Our first short story is about Jubilee's 18th birthday, and how Magneto wants her to train rather than have fun. Jubilee, of course, being annoyed by this, goes and sees Roberto, complains about it, and then they get sucked inside a video game, which is the doing of Mojo. However, Jubilee and Roberto don't realize they're in a video game until they finally do realize it, and Mojo appears. There's some interesting fourth wall breaking lines from Mojo, especially with a line about video games being like the future dominant media, which, yeah, kind of. And we continue the adventure as Jubilee enjoys running around the video game world. There's some fun twists near the end, and overall, it's a nice little coming-of-age story for Jubilee, and works a lot better than just she has a birthday and then Sentinels show up, or something more generic like that. Our second story is Life Death, which is the actual name of the story from the comics, featuring Storm and Forge, their relationship, as well as Forge trying to find a way to revitalize Storm's powers. We do see the two of them growing close, we definitely see Forge developing his feelings for Storm, and of course there's a big twist that is revealed in the original comic, which is also revealed in this episode, that I won't spoil. It also leads into our big cliffhanger at the end of this story. Overall, these 2 short stories work. After all, the Mojo-verse is really fun if you have more characters, but if you're only going to bring 2 characters in, a short story format works really well for that. The Storm and Forge story is really interesting on a character depth level, but for a children's action-adventure series, it would get boring pretty fast, so rushing through it does make sense. One of the bigger weaknesses in this episode is the themes. While both themes are decent, I feel they're not handled particularly well. The Jubilee story has, of course, the theme of growing up, but you get a ham-fisted speech near the end of the story, and it's a little weak in that regard, but does feel like what you would have in a children's television show. The second half is about dealing with grief, loss, and mistakes. And I think it deals with it fairly well, but because it rushes through the story so quickly, there isn't a lot of discussion on the theme. It is just a prevailing energy throughout the episode. Not terrible, but not great. Overall, the themes are fine. As for our characters, we get 4 main ones, so we'll kind of run through them real quick here. Jubilee is very much in character, a little bit of pop culture-y dialogue. More importantly, we get to see Jubilee's powers develop to be closer to what they are in the comics. Because while Jubilee's powers were a joke in the original series, in the comics, she's actually relatively powerful once she knows how to use her powers properly. It dawns on me that Roberto is really different than his comic book counterpart. His comic book version was a flirt, he was pop culture savvy, and he loved to have fun, and this Roberto is just more of a downer. While I do understand what they're trying to do with Roberto and his arc throughout this season, I prefer the comic book version, who actually knows how to smile and have fun. I do really like the performance of Storm in this episode. There are a lot of heavy emotions Storm needs to explore, and in a very short amount of time, and I think they actually achieve it. Forge, on the other hand, is okay. He didn't have a lot of appearances in the original series. In fact, I can only think of 1 appearance. Because of that, even though we get some backstory and what have you, the emotional impact of his story doesn't come through as much because we just don't know the character that well. While this allows us to know him a bit more, it just feels like this is character of the day explaining their problems, rather than an important building of a character we had already known, like in the comics, where Forge had been around for a little while. The audio is definitely well handled in this episode. However, I do have a few nitpicks. First off, Magneto is one of the bosses that Jubilee fights in the video game world, and he doesn't say, "I am Magneto, master of magnet," or "Welcome to die, ex-chicken." And while I do appreciate the restraint the creative staff showed in not using the memes from the X-Men arcade game, this is Mojo-verse. Use the memes! Mojo would love memes! Memes would fill Mojo with the happy feelings down in his... I'm not sure if he has a heart, but whatever his internal organ that is the representation of emotion, it would definitely fill it with joy feelings. Speaking of Mojo, his voice is very different than his original version. It's someone trying to get those higher pitched tones, but the crazy freaking voice he had in the old episodes is not quite this voice. However, the voice that is being used reminds me of something. And I don't know if it was a Mojo from one of the video games, or if it was the Mojo voice used by someone in a podcast I listened to back in the 2010s. I can't quite tell off the top of my head, but it does remind me of something. Maybe I'll figure it out after I get this episode recorded. Finally, in terms of new voices, we have Forge. He's perfectly serviceable, does a good job, and considering how little screen time the character actually has, I think he gets his emotions across very well, though the artwork really doesn't show much emotion on his face, which clashes with the performance, but the actor did a great job. I do appreciate how Mojo has a fourth wall breaking line about character designs looking a little bit different. In fact, I could have used a little more fourth wall breaking from Mojo, to be honest. I also like the older Jubilee design that they come across in the video game, because she has a very 90s look, and I think it comes off pretty well. The Mojo-verse looks like the Mojo-verse, I have no complaints. Forge's home feels a little too rustic. Oftentimes, Forge's home is a lot more super scientist than it is down-to-earth dude. And I would have liked to see a bit more of that super science throughout his household, but these are minor complaints. Overall, I think the short story format worked in the favor of this episode, and really allowed us to have a lot more story than we could have had otherwise. If we had jumped from silly video game adventure to super serious storm adventure, the tone of the episode would have been a complete mess. By doing it as two separate short stories, each one has their own tone. The first one being a fun, silly adventure, and the second one being a down-to-earth, emotional story. And that really made this episode better than if they had tried to intertwine these two stories in some half-hearted attempt to say something about growing up. Thus, having them as two separate stories makes this significantly more enjoyable and less cringe than it could have been. However, I do like my Mojo-verse stuff, and I honestly could use more Mojo in this episode and more X-Men characters put into weird situations because Mojo was bored. It is unlikely we will get any more Mojo this season, and I'm just grateful for what Mojo I got. Thank you. Obviously, I'm very positive about this episode. I think there's a lot of good about it, and it gets a 4.5 out of 5 from me. It probably would have hit a 5, but except for my nitpicks about some fourth wall jokes, a little bit of the artwork, and the themes not really being handled subtly, does bring it down just a smidge. I only hope they keep this quality level up for the remainder of the series. Before I go, I'm curious, what's your favorite X-Men game? Mine is X-Men Legends 2. Which was the original plan to be the background footage, but I honestly have no idea where my PlayStation 2 is. I move a lot, and stuff's in boxes. Anyhow, that's why I chose to use a different game for the footage, but still, X-Men Legends 2, awesome game. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and share the videos, because the more people that enjoy the video, the more I enjoy making the videos. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you at the tavern.